Tonight, we explore what happens when a simple hike becomes a coordinated hunt, and the message "see you soon" is not a farewell, but a warning. Before we begin, if stories of real-world stalking and unresolved terror keep you awake at night, consider subscribing. It helps us bring you more true horror like this. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from, and what time it is there. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt that creeping sense that someone is watching, please share this. Please make people aware, because the more we talk about these experiences, the harder it becomes for predators like this to operate in silence. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never, ever follow the masks. Are you alone right now? Now, let me tell you about the day I followed a trail of masks into the woods, and the 5 masked strangers who followed me home. It has been almost exactly 1 year since I wrote this down for the first time. Almost 1 year to the day since I experienced one of the worst, most traumatic events of my life. I am 23 years old, a college student, the kind of person who believes in logic, reason, and rational explanations for strange occurrences. I do not scare easily. I have never been the type to believe in supernatural horror or paranormal activity. But what happened to me last October was not supernatural, it was human. And that is what makes it so much worse. My best friend, his name is Marcus, and I had decided to go on a hike on a Tuesday afternoon. It was October 15th, a cold, rainy day, the kind of weather that keeps most people indoors. We chose the trail specifically because we expected it to be empty. We wanted solitude, a break from campus stress, just 2 friends walking through the woods without interruption. The trail we picked was about 6 miles outside of town, a moderately difficult loop that usually took about 2 hours to complete. We had hiked it 3 or 4 times before, always during the summer, never in weather like this. It was raining steadily when we started, not a downpour, but a persistent drizzle that made everything slick and gray. The trailhead parking lot was empty, except for our car, which felt reassuring at the time. It meant we would have the woods to ourselves. We were about 15 minutes into the hike, maybe half a mile from the parking lot, when Marcus stopped walking abruptly and pointed into the trees ahead of us. "Dude," he said quietly, "is that a face?" I followed his gaze and felt my stomach tighten. About 20 feet off the trail, partially obscured by the branches of a pine tree, was what looked like a human face staring directly at us. It was pale, expressionless, frozen in an unsettling neutral position. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. We just stood there in the rain, staring back at this thing that was staring at us. Then Marcus started walking toward it. "What are you doing?" I called after him, but he was already pushing through the underbrush, branches snapping under his boots. I followed reluctantly, my instincts screaming at me to turn around, to get back to the car, to leave this thing alone. But I did not listen to those instincts, and that is a mistake I replay in my mind almost every single night. When we got closer, we realized it was not a face at all, or rather, it was, but it was fake. It was a cheap plastic mask, the kind you buy at a Halloween store for $5 or $6, nailed directly into the bark of the tree. It was blended almost perfectly into the texture of the trunk, positioned at eye level, angled so that it appeared to be watching the trail. Whoever had placed it there had done so deliberately, carefully, with the intent to be noticed. Marcus reached up and pulled it off the tree. The nail came out easily, and he turned the mask over in his hands. There was something inside it, folded up and tucked into the hollow space where a person's face would go. It was a piece of paper, handwritten in black marker, neat block letters that read, "Number 1. Go behind this tree and continue walking until you find number 2. I told Marcus we should leave it alone. I told him this was weird, this was not normal, this felt wrong. But he laughed. He thought it was interesting. Maybe an art project. Maybe a scavenger hunt someone had set up for kids. He wanted to see where it led. So, we followed the instructions. Behind the tree we found a faint path, not an official trail, just a narrow gap between bushes and saplings where it looked like someone had walked recently. The ground was soft, muddy, and I could see boot prints pressed into the earth, fresh enough that water had not filled them in yet. We walked for maybe 2 or 3 minutes before we found the second mask, this one nailed to a low-hanging branch, its hollow eyes staring down at us. The note inside read, "Number 2. Keep going straight. You are doing great." There was something about that phrase, "You are doing great," that made my skin crawl. It felt personal, encouraging, like whoever wrote this knew we would find it, knew we would keep going. Marcus was still treating it like a game, but I was starting to feel genuinely uneasy. The rain was getting heavier, the woods were darkening even though it was only 3 in the afternoon, and we were moving farther and farther away from the main trail. We found the third mask 10 minutes later, tucked into the hollow of a rotted-out stump. This note said, "Number 3. You are almost there." The fourth mask was hanging from a thin wire stretched between 2 trees, spinning slowly in the wind, its face turned toward the direction we were walking. The note inside was shorter, "Number 4. One more." By this point, I was done. I told Marcus we needed to turn around. We needed to get back to the trail. This was not funny anymore. This was not art. This was something else entirely. But he insisted on finding the 5th mask. He said we had come this far, we might as well finish it. And stupidly, foolishly, I agreed. We found the 5th mask nailed to a tree at the edge of a small clearing, a space maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by dense forest. This mask was different. It was not angled toward the trail. It was facing away, looking deeper into the woods, as if pointing us toward something we could not see. The note inside was the shortest of all, just 3 words written in the same neat handwriting. "See you soon." Marcus read it aloud, then laughed nervously. "See you soon? What does that mean?" I did not answer. I was too busy listening to the sounds around us, branches snapping somewhere off to our left. Footsteps maybe, or just the wind, I could not tell. There was a rustling noise behind us, deliberate and rhythmic, like someone walking through the underbrush, but stopping whenever we stopped moving. I told Marcus we needed to leave right now, and this time, he did not argue. We practically ran back to the trail, following our own muddy footprints, not speaking, just moving as fast as we could without slipping. When we finally made it back to the parking lot, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the car. Marcus tried to make jokes on the drive home, tried to laugh off the whole experience, but I could tell he was rattled too. His voice was too high, his laughter too forced. He dropped me off at my apartment around 5:30 in the evening. I live alone, a small 1-bedroom place on the 2nd floor of an older building near campus. I went inside, locked the door behind me, took a long shower, tried to convince myself that it had just been a weird prank, nothing more. I made dinner, I watched television, I told myself I was being paranoid. But I kept hearing noises, small sounds that I would normally ignore, footsteps in the hallway outside my door, a car engine idling on the street below, the creak of floorboards in the apartment above mine. Every sound felt loaded with meaning, with threat, with the possibility that someone was out there, watching, waiting. At around 11 o'clock that night, I looked out my living room window and saw them. There were 5 of them standing on my front lawn. 5 people, spread out in a loose semicircle, perfectly still, facing my building. And every single one of them was wearing a mask, the same cheap plastic masks we had found on the trail, identical in every way. They were just standing there, silent, motionless, staring up at my window. For a moment, I could not move, I could not breathe, I could not process what I was seeing. My mind tried to rationalize it, tried to tell me I was hallucinating, that I was tired, that this was not real. But it was real. They were real, and they were on my lawn. Then they started moving. It was not normal movement. It was erratic, jerky, unnatural. They danced, if you can call it that. swaying and twitching and spinning in place, their heads tilted at odd angles, their arms hanging loose at their sides. There was no music, no rhythm, just this disturbing, uncoordinated motion that made my stomach turn. One of them broke away from the group and walked up to my front door. I heard the doorbell ring once, twice, 3 times in rapid succession. Then nothing. Then the doorbell again, over and over, a relentless repetition that echoed through my apartment and made my head pound. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The dispatcher answered, and I tried to explain what was happening, but my voice came out in a panicked rush, barely coherent. She told me to stay inside, to lock all my doors and windows, that officers were on their way. The doorbell stopped ringing. For a few seconds, there was silence, and I thought maybe they were leaving. Maybe it was over. Then I heard the first impact. Someone was slamming their body against my front door. It was a heavy, rhythmic thudding sound, flesh and bone hitting wood, over and over again. I could hear them grunting with the effort, could hear the door frame rattling in its hinges. Another one joined in, then another, until all 5 of them were taking turns throwing themselves against the door, a coordinated assault that made the entire apartment shake. I backed away from the door, moved into my bedroom, locked that door too, even though I knew it would not matter. A bedroom lock would not stop anyone who really wanted to get in. I could still hear them, the impacts, the grunting, the sound of wood splintering slightly under the force. Then I heard sirens. The impact stopped immediately. I heard footsteps running, multiple sets, scattering in different directions. By the time I worked up the courage to look out the window again, they were gone. The lawn was empty, and 2 police cars were pulling up to the curb, their lights flashing red and blue across the wet pavement. The officers searched the area, checked my door for damage, took my statement. They were professional, calm, reassuring in the way that cops are trained to be. They told me they would patrol the neighborhood, that they would file a report, that I should call immediately if anything else happened. But I could see it in their eyes. They thought this was a prank, college kids messing around, nothing serious, nothing dangerous. One of the officers asked if I had any idea who might have done this. I told him about the masks, about the trail, about the notes. He wrote it all down, but I could tell he was skeptical. He asked if I had been drinking, if I had taken anything, if I was sure about what I had seen. I told him I was sober. I was certain this had happened exactly the way I described it. They left around midnight. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, my phone in my hand, watching the door, listening for any sound that did not belong. Nothing happened. The night passed slowly, quietly, unbearably. The next morning, I called Marcus. I told him what had happened, and he went silent on the other end of the line. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. "Dude," he said quietly, "I did not tell anyone where you live." "Did you?" I had not. And that is when I realized whoever they were, they had followed us. They had watched us, tracked us, learned where I lived, and waited until I was alone. I went to the police station that afternoon and filed a formal report. I brought the officer back to the trail with me, back to the spot where we had found the masks. We walked the same path Marcus and I had taken, following the same muddy boot prints, retracing every step. The masks were gone. All 5 of them had been removed, every single note, every piece of evidence, as if they had never existed. The nails were still there, small holes in the bark, where the masks had been attached, but nothing else. No plastic, no paper, no proof that any of this had happened. The officer took photos of the nail holes, measured distances, made notes in a small spiral notebook. But I could see the doubt creeping into his expression, the subtle shift from concern to skepticism. He asked if my friend could corroborate my story, and I called Marcus right there, on the trail. Marcus confirmed everything, described the masks, the notes, the exact wording of the messages. The officer seemed slightly more convinced after that. But not enough. He classified the incident as an elaborate prank in his report. Not a crime, not harassment, not stalking, just a prank. He told me that without physical evidence, without identifiable suspects, there was very little they could do. He suggested I install a security system, change my locks, be more aware of my surroundings. I did all of those things. I installed cameras at my front and back doors. I put motion sensor lights on my porch. I changed my locks. I even bought pepper spray and kept it on my keychain. But none of it made me feel safer. None of it answered the questions that kept me awake at night. Who were they? How did they know where I lived? Why me? I started researching, obsessively, compulsively, the way people do when they are trying to make sense of something that defies logic. I searched Reddit. I went through for similar stories, similar patterns, looking for anyone else who had experienced something like this. I found 3 posts, spread out over 5 years from different states, different trails, but always the same setup. Masks on trees, notes leading deeper into the woods, final messages that were vague and threatening. One person claimed they were followed home, but never saw who it was. Another said they received anonymous messages for months afterward. Photos of their house, their car, their daily routine, always sent from burner accounts that were deleted immediately after. I tried to contact these people, sent them direct messages, asked if they had ever found out who was responsible. 2 of them never responded. Their accounts had been deleted or abandoned. The 3rd person replied 3 days later with a single sentence. Stop looking into this. It is not worth it. I did not stop. I cross-referenced dates, locations, tried to find connections between the victims. I made spreadsheets, timelines, maps. I became the kind of person I used to make fun of. The conspiracy theorist, the obsessive investigator, the person who sees patterns where there might be none. Then I had a realization that made everything worse. I went back through my social media posts from the weeks leading up to the hike, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, anywhere I had shared photos or locations. 3 weeks before the incident, I had posted a picture of the trail entrance with the caption "Best hiking spot near campus, always empty on weekdays." I had tagged the location. I had checked in. They had not followed me from the trail. They had known where I would be because I had told them. I had advertised it to the entire internet. I had given them a schedule, a location, and a guarantee that I would be alone. The masks, the notes, the entire setup had been planned specifically for me. They had been waiting for me to show up. They had orchestrated the whole thing, and I had walked right into it. It has been 11 months since that night. The case is still technically open, but there have been no new leads, no arrests, no answers. The police told me that without more evidence, there's nothing they can do. They suggested I move, change my routines, stay vigilant. I did move. I found a new apartment on the other side of town, a place with better security, a doorman, cameras in every hallway. But it did not help. The fear followed me. It lives in my chest now, a constant weight that never goes away. I do not hike anymore. I do not go into the woods. I do not even walk alone after dark. I check my locks 3, 4, 5 times before bed. I keep my phone charged and within reach at all times. I have a baseball bat leaning against my bedroom wall that I have never used but cannot bring myself to put away. Marcus and I do not talk about it anymore. He has tried a few times, tried to reassure me that it was just a stupid prank, that whoever did it has moved on, that I am safe now. But he was not the one they came for. He was not the one they found. He does not wake up every night convinced he hears footsteps in the hallway outside his door. I kept one of the masks, the first one we found, the one Marcus pulled off the tree. I know I should have given it to the police, but I needed proof. I needed something tangible that proved I was not losing my mind. I keep it in a box in my closet, hidden under old clothes, and sometimes late at night when I cannot sleep, I take it out and stare at it, at the empty eye holes, at the cheap plastic face, and I try to understand what kind of person would do this. What kind of mind would plan something so elaborate, so terrifying, for no reason other than to watch someone suffer? I still do not have an answer. The note said, "See you soon," and I do not know if that was a promise or a threat or just a way to make sure I would never feel safe again. It has been almost a year, and they have not come back, but I cannot stop waiting for them to. I cannot stop expecting to look out my window one night and see 5 masked figures standing on my lawn, dancing in the dark, waiting for me. I am sharing this story because I need people to understand that this kind of thing happens, that there are people out there who will target you for no reason, who will follow you, who will invade your sense of safety just to prove that they can. I am sharing this because if you ever find something like this on a trail, a mask, a note, anything that feels wrong, do not follow it, do not engage with it, turn around, leave, call the police, do not give them what they want. I made the mistake of following those clues. I made the mistake of thinking it was harmless, and now I live with the consequences every single day. They said they would see me soon. I do not know if that means days, months, years, or never. I do not know if they are still out there, if they have moved on to someone else, if they are reading this right now and laughing at how afraid I still am. All I know is that I am still waiting, I am still afraid, and I'm still checking my locks every single night before I go to bed. Because somewhere out there, they are still wearing those masks. And maybe, just maybe, they are planning to keep their promise. See you soon. Tonight, we explore what happens when inspiration comes from a place darker than imagination, when the stories we consume are not fiction at all. Now, let me tell you about the inheritance that Maya Torres wishes she had never accepted. Maya Torres arrived at the house on Blackthorn Road 3 days after her grandmother's funeral, when the winter light had already begun its early surrender to darkness. The property had sat empty for 6 months during probate, accumulating silence the way other houses accumulated dust. Her grandmother, Vera Torres, had been a recluse for the last 2 decades of her life, and Maya had not seen her since childhood. The inheritance was unexpected. The timing, she told herself, was providence. She needed this. Her writing career had collapsed 8 months prior, when a literary blog exposed her second novel as plagiarized, lifted nearly verbatim from an obscure thesis published in 1997. The scandal had been swift and absolute. Book deal cancelled, agent dropped her, social media crucifixion complete. Maya had not meant to steal. She genuinely could not remember reading that thesis, but intention mattered little in the court of public opinion. She was marked now, permanently. A fraud. The house was her chance to disappear, to rebuild in obscurity. It was larger than she expected, a sprawling Victorian structure that seemed to lean slightly, as if bearing the weight of too many years. The interior was preserved in a way that felt less like careful maintenance and more like suspended animation. Vera's belongings remained untouched, books alphabetized, furniture arranged with geometric precision, everything in its place. But the air felt wrong, thick and watchful, as if the house itself were holding its breath. Maya set up her laptop in the study, a wood-paneled room with windows that faced the overgrown garden. She had been unable to write since the scandal, every sentence feeling borrowed, every idea suspect. But here, in this strange stillness, she thought perhaps the words might return. That first night, the Wi-Fi acted strangely. Her laptop connected automatically to a network she had not set up, a signal called EchoStream, with full bars despite there being no router visible anywhere in the house. When she tried to disconnect, the network reconnected itself within seconds. Curious but not yet alarmed, Maya opened her writing software and found a document she had not created. The file was titled Subject 7, and it contained a short story written in clean, clinical prose. A woman named Jennifer, 23 years old, a graduate student who disappeared after responding to a Craigslist ad for a writing retreat. The story described her fear in exquisite detail. The moment she realized the retreat host was not who he claimed to be, the desperate scramble for her phone, the realization that help would not come. It ended mid-sentence, as if the writer had simply stopped existing. Maya stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. She had not written this. She had not even opened the document. But it was good, disturbingly good, the kind of atmospheric horror she had always aspired to write but never quite managed. The details were too specific, too raw. It felt real, in a way fiction rarely did. She told herself it was a fluke, some previous document from the cloud, maybe something her grandmother had written. Vera had been a librarian, not a writer, but perhaps she had dabbled. Maya closed the file without saving and went to bed. The next morning, there were 3 more documents. Subject 11, Subject 15, Subject 19. Each one a self-contained horror story. Each one about a different victim. Different ages, different backgrounds, but all sharing a common thread. They had come to this house seeking something, healing, inspiration, solitude, and had never left. The stories were fragments, incomplete narratives that ended abruptly, as if the teller had been interrupted mid-thought. Maya should have been disturbed. She should have deleted them immediately. Instead, she read them all. They were extraordinary. Each story captured fear with an intimacy that felt invasive, like reading someone's diary in their final moments. The prose was spare and poetic, atmospheric, in a way that reminded her of the literary horror she consumed obsessively, but could never replicate herself. And buried in each narrative were sensory details so specific, they felt like memories. The smell of formaldehyde mixed with pine needles, the sound of scratching beneath floorboards, the taste of copper in the air. By the 4th day, Maya had convinced herself the stories were a gift. Perhaps her grandmother had been a secret writer, documenting local legends or cold cases. Perhaps this was Vera's legacy, passing the torch to her estranged granddaughter. It was convenient, this rationalization, and Maya needed convenient. She needed inspiration. She needed redemption. She edited Subject 7, changed the names, adjusted the setting, and published it on a horror fiction forum under a pseudonym. It went viral within hours. Comments poured in praising the authenticity, the visceral dread, the way it felt less like fiction and more like testimony. Maya felt the validation she had been starving for since the scandal, the affirmation that she could create something meaningful. That night, she slept deeply for the first time in months. When she woke, there were 6 new documents waiting. The pattern continued. Every morning, new stories appeared in her writing folder, each one tagged with a subject number, each one incomplete. Maya told herself she was simply curating, editing, that the raw material was there and she was just shaping it into something publishable. She posted 1 story per week, building an audience, rebuilding her name under a new identity. People began calling her work the most authentic horror fiction they had ever read. Readers said her stories felt true. They were right, but Maya did not want to acknowledge why. It was on the 19th day that she found Vera's journal. It was hidden behind a loose panel in the study, a leather-bound notebook filled with her grandmother's cramped handwriting. Maya opened it expecting recipes or mundane observations. What she found instead made her hands shake. Entries dated back 40 years. The first was clinical, detached. Subject 1 arrived today, a young man seeking solitude to finish his dissertation. He believes this house will provide the peace he needs. He does not yet understand what peace means here. Maya flipped forward, skimming entries that grew progressively more detailed, more methodical. Subject 7 showed remarkable resistance. Fear, response peaked at hour 72. Recorded energy signature strongest in study, cellar, and garden perimeter. Subject 11, Attempted escape via root cellar, unsuccessful. Final recording captured at 0400 hours. Excellent clarity. Subject 19. The entries became sparse here, incomplete, as if Vera herself had been interrupted. The final entry was dated 6 months before her death. The signal is weakening. I am weakening. But the house remembers. The house will continue. Whoever inherits this place will inherit the work. The recordings are stored in the field itself. They will find them. They will use them. The cycle does not end. Maya sat motionless, the journal heavy in her lap. She understood now. The stories were not fiction. They were recordings, residual imprints of terror encoded in the electromagnetic field of the house itself. Vera had not been a writer. She had been a collector, luring vulnerable people seeking refuge and documenting their fear as they realized there was no escape. 23 subjects over 4 decades. 23 people whose final moments had been absorbed into the walls, the floors, the very air of this place. And Maya had been consuming them, publishing them, profiting from them. She thought of the comments on her stories, the readers praising the authenticity, the way they felt real. She thought of her growing follower count, the messages from publishers expressing interest, the redemption arc she had been so desperate for. It was built on atrocity. She should have gone to the police immediately. She should have exposed everything, destroyed her pseudonymous accounts, burned the journal. But instead, Maya sat in the study and opened her laptop. There were 4 new documents waiting. Her hands hovered over the keyboard, trembling. She could stop now. She could walk away. But the stories were so good, and she had worked so hard to rebuild her career, and no one would ever know. The victims were already gone. Their suffering had already happened. Was it not better that their fear be transformed into art, rather than simply dissolving into nothing? Was it not, in some way, honoring them? Maya recognized the rationalization for what it was, the same logic her grandmother must have used, the same logic every exploiter uses when transforming pain into profit. She recognized it, understood it, and opened subject 24 anyway. This one was different. The perspective was wrong, inverted somehow. Instead of reading about a victim's fear, Maya found herself reading about a woman who had inherited a house, who had discovered its terrible secret, who had chosen to continue the work. The prose was familiar, uncomfortably so. It was her own writing style. The story described her arrival at the house, her discovery of the automated documents, her decision to publish them. It described this exact moment, reading this exact file, the dawning realization spreading across her features like a stain. And then it continued. It described what would happen next. How she would rationalize publishing just one more story, then another, then another. How the house would begin to absorb her own fear, as she slowly understood she could not leave, that she was not the inheritor but the next subject. How her terror would be recorded in the electromagnetic field, stored alongside the others, waiting for whoever came next. It described her resistance, her attempts to escape, the discovery that the doors would not open, that her phone had no signal, that the route to the road had somehow vanished in the dark. It described her final moments in perfect clinical detail. Maya stood abruptly, the laptop crashing to the floor. She ran to the front door, grabbed the handle. It turned freely. The door opened onto the porch, the driveway, the road beyond. Evening had fallen, but she could see streetlights in the distance. Escape was possible. Escape was right there. But as she stood on the threshold, Maya felt the pull. Not physical, something deeper. A gravitational collapse in her chest, a belonging that felt like drowning. She thought of the stories she had published, the audience she had built, the redemption she had almost achieved. She thought of walking away, starting over again in another city, carrying the knowledge of what she had done, of what she had become. She thought of the readers who would wonder why she stopped posting. She thought of Vera's final journal entry, "The cycle does not end." Maya stepped back inside and closed the door. She returned to the study, picked up her laptop, opened a new document. Her hands moved across the keyboard with a fluidity she had not felt since before the scandal, words flowing effortlessly, inevitably. She was writing her own story now, not editing someone else's fear, but documenting her own. The house hummed around her, a low electromagnetic frequency she could feel in her teeth, and she understood that she was not writing at all. She was being recorded. Subject 24. She typed, arrived seeking redemption. She found it, but not in the way she imagined. The Wi-Fi signal pulsed stronger. 5 bars now, glowing on her screen like a heartbeat. Somewhere in the walls, in the field that surrounded and penetrated this place, her fear was being stored alongside all the others. Transformed into data, waiting to be discovered by the next person desperate enough to mistake exploitation for art, consumption for tribute, storytelling for absolution. Maya kept typing. Outside, the garden continued its patient work, roots spreading beneath soil enriched by decades of silence. Inside, the house breathed softly, adding another voice to its collection. And on a server somewhere, or perhaps in no server at all, but simply in the humming magnetic memory of wood and wire and stone, a new document began to generate. Subject 25, it would be titled, "The Cycle, as Vera promised, did not end." It simply found new hosts. We tell ourselves that witnessing suffering gives it meaning, that transforming pain into narrative honors the source. But what if some stories are not ours to tell? What if the act of consumption, no matter how we dress it in tribute or awareness, is itself the violation? Maya learned too late that there is no ethical way to profit from atrocity, no redemption to be found in repackaging someone else's fear. The scariest monsters are not the ones who create suffering. They are the ones who harvest it, who tell themselves they are doing something noble while building careers on graves. And the most terrifying truth, we recognize ourselves in them because we are all consuming something we should not. The only question is whether we will notice before we become the next story someone else tells. Tonight, we explore what happens when a routine hike becomes an encounter with something that defies explanation. Now, let me tell you about the afternoon that made me question everything I thought I understood about the woods I had walked 100 times before. This happened to me in late September of 2019. I am 32 years old. I work in IT, and I have been hiking the trails around Blackwater Creek since I moved to the area 3 years ago. I'm not the type of person who sees danger in every shadow or believes in supernatural nonsense. I am rational, methodical, maybe even a little boring if you ask my girlfriend Sarah. But what happened that Thursday afternoon, it changed something in me that I cannot quite explain, even now. I had Max with me, my German Shepherd. He was 4 years old at the time, well-trained, protective, but not aggressive unless he sensed actual danger. In 3 years of hiking together, he had barked at exactly 2 things, a black bear cub we needed to avoid, and a copperhead snake I almost stepped on. That is it. Max was reliable. Steady, the kind of dog that made you feel safe in the woods. The trail I usually took followed Blackwater Creek for about 2 miles, before looping back through denser forest. It was not heavily trafficked, maybe 5 or 6 other hikers on a busy weekend, but it was well maintained and felt safe. The town had been having some issues with drifters camping near the water, but nothing serious, just people passing through looking for a place to sleep. The local sheriff, an old friend of mine from high school named Marcus Webb, had mentioned they had received some odd reports over the past few months. People hearing voices near the creek at night, finding abandoned campsites with strange symbols carved into trees. But this was Appalachia. Weird stuff happened out in the woods sometimes. I did not think much of it. That afternoon was overcast, darker than usual for 4 in the afternoon. The temperature had dropped suddenly, one of those early fall days where you realize summer is truly over. I had told Sarah I would be back by 6. I had my phone fully charged, and I knew the trail well enough to hike it with my eyes closed. Everything was routine, normal, safe. That is when I first noticed the smell. It hit me about a mile in, right where the trail gets closest to the creek. It was this weird, sharp odor, like copper mixed with something electrical, the way the air smells right before a lightning strike. Ozone, that is what Sarah called it later when I tried to describe it. But there was something else underneath it, something organic and wrong, like meat that has started to turn. Max noticed it too. His ears went back, his tail dropped, and he started that low, rumbling growl I had only heard twice before. I stopped walking, scanned the trees, listened. Nothing. Just the sound of water moving over rocks and the wind in the pines. It is probably just a dead animal, I said out loud, more to reassure myself than anything. Max did not relax. He kept his eyes fixed on something ahead, something I could not see yet. I should have turned around right then. That is the thing about these stories. The moment you look back and think, that was when I should have left. But I did not. I was curious, maybe a little proud that I was not the type to spook easily. So I kept walking, one hand on Max's collar, the other holding my phone just in case. The smell got stronger. The temperature seemed to drop another 10 degrees. And then I heard it, splashing in the creek, heavy and erratic, like someone thrashing through water without caring about the noise they made. I stopped at the bend in the trail where you first get a clear view of the creek. That is when I saw him. He came up out of the water maybe 30 yards ahead, not walking up the bank, but emerging straight up out of the creek itself, like he had been lying submerged in 2 feet of water. His clothes were soaked through, jeans and a dark jacket that clung to him, water streaming off him in sheets. But it was September. The water was maybe 50 degrees, and this man was standing there like he had just stepped out of a warm shower. He turned toward me slowly, too slowly, like his body was on a delay from his brain. And then he smiled. It was not a normal smile. It was too wide, stretched across his face in a way that made his cheeks look wrong, like a child's drawing of what a smile should be. His eyes were locked on mine, unblinking, pupils dilated so wide they looked black. "I see you," he said. His voice was flat, emotionless, like someone reading words they did not understand. Max lunged forward, barking now, full aggressive stance, hackles up, teeth bared. I had never seen him react like that to a person. Never. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound calm, authoritative. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The man did not respond. He just kept staring at me, kept smiling, and then he said it again. "I see you." His movements were jerky, unnatural, like stop-motion animation. He took a step toward me, then another, his feet making wet, squelching sounds in the mud. The smell intensified, that copper ozone stench mixed with something worse now, something that made my stomach turn. "Stay back," I said, louder now. "I am calling the police." He laughed. It was the worst sound I've ever heard, not because it was loud or threatening, but because it was wrong. It was mechanical, rhythmic, like a recording played at slightly the wrong speed. And through it all he kept smiling, kept walking toward me. I fumbled for my phone, nearly dropped it, managed to dial 911. My hands were shaking. Max was barking continuously now, positioning himself between me and the man, every muscle in his body tensed. The man crossed the creek, water sloshing around his knees, never breaking eye contact, never stopping that horrible smile. He got within 10 feet of us, then 5. Close enough that I could see his skin was pale, almost bluish, and covered in a thin sheen of moisture that did not look like water. Close enough that I could hear him breathing, rapid and shallow, like a dog panting. "I see you, I see you, I see you," he chanted, his voice rising in pitch. The 911 operator was asking me questions, but I could barely focus on her words. The man reached out, his hand extended toward my face, fingers splayed. His skin was ice cold when it brushed my cheek, so cold it burned. I shoved him hard. He stumbled back, his smile finally faltering, and then he opened his mouth and screamed. It was not a human scream. It was too loud, too high, sustained for too long without a breath. It filled the entire forest, echoed off the trees, sent birds exploding from their perches in panic. And through it all, underneath it, I swear I could hear laughter. That is when I heard the sirens. Marcus Webb arrived first, his patrol car skidding to a stop on the access road maybe 50 yards away. He came running down the trail with 2 other officers, hands on their weapons, shouting for the man to get on the ground. The man turned toward them, his scream cutting off abruptly, his smile returning. And then he charged. He moved faster than should have been possible for someone who had been standing in freezing water, faster than Marcus could react. He hit Marcus like a linebacker, took him to the ground, and it took all 3 officers to pull him off. Even restrained, cuffed, he was thrashing with inhuman strength, screaming words that were not words, just sounds that hurt to hear. They found the knife when they searched him, a kitchen knife with a 6-inch blade tucked into his jacket. No wallet, no ID, no phone. Nothing to identify him at all. The paramedics arrived 10 minutes later. They checked him for injuries, for drugs, for anything that would explain his behavior. His body temperature was 89 degrees, dangerously hypothermic, but he was not shivering, was not showing any of the normal symptoms. His pupils were dilated but reactive. His heart rate was elevated but steady. They could not explain it. Another hiker had seen the whole thing from further up the trail, an older woman who had been taking photographs of fall foliage. She gave a statement that matched mine, exactly. She even mentioned the smell, said it reminded her of a chemical fire she had witnessed years ago. They took him to County General first, then transferred him to the state psychiatric facility when he would not, or could not, stop screaming. Marcus called me that night, told me the man had no fingerprints in the system, no missing person reports that matched, no history anywhere. It was like he did not exist. "This is the 3rd one this month," Marcus said, his voice tired. "3rd person we have pulled out of those woods acting like that. Same spot, same behavior, same weird smell. We're sending the reports up the chain, but nobody knows what to make of it." I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile, heard that voice. "I see you." Sarah held me while I shook, told me it was over, that I was safe. But I did not feel safe. I felt like something had looked at me, really looked at me, and seen something I did not want seen. I started researching the next day. I am a data person. I needed answers, needed patterns. The county library had newspaper archives going back to 1950. It took me 3 days, but I found them. November 1967. Headline: Local man found raving near Blackwater Creek. No identification. August 1983. Headline: Hiker attacked by unknown assailant near creek. Suspect institutionalized. October 19th, 99. Headline: Strange encounter in woods baffles local police. Every 15 to 20 years. Always the same location. Always someone with no identity, acting erratically, smiling, sometimes violent. The articles mentioned different physical descriptions. The man changed every time, but the behavior was consistent. One article from 1983 mentioned a witness who described the assailant as grinning like he knew a secret no one else could understand. I tried to visit him at the psychiatric facility 2 weeks later. They would not let me see him, patient confidentiality, but a sympathetic nurse told me he had not spoken a single coherent word since he arrived. He just smiled and stared at the walls. They had him on enough sedatives to drop a horse, but his eyes were always open, always tracking, always watching. Marcus gave me the rest off the record. The man's body temperature had normalized, but slowly, over the course of several days. The toxicology reports came back clean. No drugs, no alcohol, nothing in his system that should not have been there. The psychiatric evaluation was inconclusive because he would not, or could not, participate. They diagnosed him with acute psychosis of unknown origin and kept him heavily medicated. After 30 days, they transferred him to a state facility. I never found out what happened to him after that. He just disappeared into the system, another unexplained case file gathering dust somewhere. I went back to Blackwater Creek 6 months later in the spring. I needed to prove to myself that I could, that I was not going to let fear control me. Max refused to go past the parking lot. He planted his feet, whined, and would not budge. So I went alone, in broad daylight, with a canister of pepper spray and my phone recording the entire time. The spot where it happened felt wrong. The trees were the same, the creek was the same, but there was a weight to the air, a pressure that made my chest tight. Other hikers avoided that section now, I noticed. They would come down the trail, see the bend where the creek was visible, and turn around without a word. It had developed a reputation, the kind of local legend people do not talk about directly, but everyone knows. The Park Service rerouted the trail 2 months after my encounter. They said it was due to erosion concerns, but Marcus told me they had received too many reports, too many complaints. Whatever was in those woods, the county did not want people near it anymore. I found a support group online, people who had experienced similar encounters in different parts of the country. The Grinning Man, they called it, though nobody agreed on what it actually was. Some thought it was a shared delusion, a form of mass hysteria triggered by environmental factors. Others believed it was something else entirely, something that did not fit into our understanding of reality. I do not know what I believe anymore. I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I know that man's hand was cold enough to leave a mark on my cheek that lasted for 3 days. I know Max still will not go near that trail, even a year later. I know I wake up sometimes, heart pounding, because I dreamed I heard someone whispering, "I see you." The man is still institutionalized as far as I know. Still smiling. Still watching. Nobody has ever identified him. Nobody knows where he came from, or why he was in those woods. And according to the pattern I found, if history holds, it will happen again in another 15 years. Someone else will go hiking near Blackwater Creek, someone else will see that smile, and someone else will spend the rest of their life wondering what they actually encountered that day. I still hike. I will not let fear take that from me. But I never go alone anymore. I never go near water I cannot see the bottom of. And I always trust my dog when he tells me something is wrong. Because the worst part is not the fear. The worst part is not knowing. The worst part is understanding that there are things in this world, real things that happen to real people, that have no explanation, no resolution, no closure. Just a smiling face in the woods, and a voice that says, "I see you." And you can never be sure if it is gone, or if it is just waiting. That is the truth. That is what happened. And I am sharing it because someone else out there has seen him too. I know they have. And if you are reading this, if you have ever encountered something near water that smiled too wide and spoke too flat, document everything. Tell someone. Do not try to rationalize it away. Because sometimes, the scariest monsters are not the ones in stories. They are the ones that actually exist, standing in a creek at twilight, watching you with eyes that see too much. And they never really leave. Tonight, we explore what happens when curiosity leads you beneath a place of worship and what you find there suggests God abandoned this ground long ago. Now, let me tell you about the church that my friends and I wish we had never entered. My name is Michael. I am 32 years old, and for the past decade, I have gone hiking in the Adirondacks every October with the same 3 people: Ricky, Amy, and Devin. We met in college, bonded over a shared love of the outdoors, and this annual trip became something we all looked forward to, a week away from jobs and screens and the noise of normal life. We were experienced hikers, the kind who plan routes months in advance, who carry proper gear, who know how to read topographic maps and respect the wilderness. October of 2019 should have been no different. We had chosen a route that would take us through some of the more remote areas of the park, places where you can hike for hours without seeing another person, where the cell signal dies and the only sounds are wind through pine trees and your own breathing. On the 3rd day, we decided to go off-trail, nothing too risky, just a slight detour to explore a ridgeline that looked interesting on Ricky's GPS. That is when we found it. The church. It appeared suddenly, as if the forest had simply parted to reveal it. A small wooden structure, maybe 40 feet long and 20 feet wide, surrounded by overgrown grass and saplings that had begun reclaiming the clearing around it. The architecture was old, 1800s based on the design, with a simple peaked roof and narrow windows that had long since lost their glass. There was no road leading to it, no path, no sign that anyone had been here in decades. Amy, who had minored in history, immediately pulled out her phone to take photos. She was the kind of person who got excited about things like this, about stumbling onto something forgotten. Ricky was less enthusiastic. He took one look at the building and said what we were all thinking: why is there a church out here? This is 8 miles from the nearest marked trail. Devin, ever the skeptic, shrugged and said it was probably just an old hunting cabin someone had repurposed. But even he could not explain the cross mounted above the door, or the faded paint that still clung to the exterior in patches, spelling out something that might have been a dedication date. We decided to go inside. The door was not locked. It was not even fully closed, hanging slightly ajar as if someone had left in a hurry and never bothered to return. I pushed it open, and the hinges groaned, a sound that seemed too loud in the stillness of the forest. Inside, the air was cold, colder than it should have been given the mild October weather, and there was a smell, faint but unmistakable, like sulfur. The interior was simple. Wooden pews, maybe a dozen of them, arranged in 2 rows facing a small altar at the far end. The altar itself was bare, except for an old Bible, open to a page in Revelations, the paper yellowed and brittle. There were hymnals scattered across the pews, their covers warped, and pages swollen from moisture. Everything was coated in a fine layer of dust, disturbed only by the footprints we left as we walked. Amy moved toward the altar, running her fingers along the edge of one of the pews. That is when she noticed something. "This dedication date," she said, pointing to a small brass plaque mounted on the wall. "It says 1847. But the construction style is older, more like early 1800s. And look at these carvings." She was right. Along the sides of the pews, there were symbols carved into the wood, crude but deliberate. They did not look like any Christian iconography I had ever seen. Circles within circles, lines radiating outward like rays of a sun, shapes that seemed almost alchemical. Ricky was taking photos, his camera clicking in the silence, but I noticed he was frowning. "My lens keeps fogging up," he said, wiping it with his shirt. "It is like there's moisture in the air, but it feels dry." Devin walked to the back of the church near the altar and knelt down. He pressed his hand against the floorboards. "These are warped," he said, "like they have been exposed to heat. And there are scratches here, like something heavy was dragged across them. A lot." We all moved closer. He was right. The boards near the altar showed signs of heavy wear, grooves worn into the wood that suggested frequent traffic. And beneath the altar itself, barely visible unless you were looking for it, was a recessed handle. A door. We looked at each other, and I could see the debate playing out on everyone's faces. This was someone's property, technically, even if it had been abandoned for decades. Opening that door felt like a line we maybe should not cross. But curiosity, that is a powerful thing. I reached down and pulled the handle. The door lifted with surprising ease, revealing a shaft that descended roughly 8 feet into darkness. There were handholds carved into the stone walls, and at the bottom, I could just make out the floor of a chamber. Warm air rose from below, which made no sense for an underground space in October, and with it came that smell again, stronger now, like something burning very slowly for a very long time. We tied a rope to one of the pews and dropped it down into the shaft. Ricky went first, then Amy, then me, and finally Devon. The moment I reached the bottom, I knew this was not just a cellar. The chamber was large, maybe 15 feet by 20 feet, with rough-hewn walls that looked hand-carved. And covering every surface, the walls, the ceiling, even parts of the floor, were paintings. They were primitive in style, done in what looked like charcoal and some kind of reddish pigment, probably ochre. But the imagery was disturbing. Figures in robes gathered around a crack in the earth, flames rising from below. A congregation kneeling, hands raised, faces turned upward in what could have been ecstasy or agony. Symbols, the same ones we had seen upstairs, repeated over and over. Amy was already examining them, her historian's mind trying to make sense of it. She pointed to one section of wall where the symbols were more densely clustered. "These look alchemical," she said. "Pre-Enlightenment stuff. 1700s maybe. But this church is supposed to be from the mid-1800s. That does not make sense." Devon was less interested in the paintings and more interested in the chamber itself. He walked the perimeter, his flashlight sweeping across the floor. There were worn paths in the stone, places where countless feet had walked the same route over and over. The ceiling was blackened with soot, evidence of fire, but there was no fire pit, no obvious source. And then we saw it. At the far end of the chamber, partially hidden behind a rock outcropping, was another opening. This one had been boarded up. Thick planks of wood nailed across the entrance with what looked like iron nails, the expensive kind. The kind you only use when you really want something to stay closed. Ricky took one look at it and said, "I do not like this. We should go." But the rest of us were already moving toward it. I do not know why. It was like something was pulling us forward. A need to see what had been hidden. Devon pulled out a crowbar from his pack, something he always carried for emergencies, and we pried the boards loose. Behind them was a tunnel. It was narrow, maybe 3 feet wide, carved through solid rock. And from it came a steady flow of warm air, far warmer than the chamber, carrying with it that sulfur smell and something else, something faintly organic and wrong. Ricky stayed in the chamber. He refused to go any further, and honestly, I do not blame him. The three of us, Amy, Devon, and me, we crawled into that tunnel with our flashlights and kept going. The tunnel extended for maybe 30 feet before it opened into a natural cave system. The walls here were limestone, worn smooth by ancient water flow, and the temperature had risen to what felt like 85, maybe 90 degrees. Our flashlight beams revealed more paintings, but these were more detailed, more deliberate. We saw images of a congregation gathered underground, figures in white robes standing in a circle. We saw a mural that depicted people kneeling before a crack in the earth, flames pouring out while others watched. And near the back of the cave, we found physical evidence. Fragments of cloth, deteriorated but preserved by the heat and dryness. Bone fragments, small ones, scattered near the base of the wall. A wooden cross, charred completely black, embedded into the rock as if it had been placed there and then burned in situ. Amy was recording everything with her phone, her voice shaking as she narrated what we were seeing. She kept saying it looked like a religious site, some kind of ritual chamber, and that the dates did not make sense because the paintings looked older than the church. That is when I started feeling it. The headache came first, a dull throb behind my eyes. Then the nausea, subtle but building. And then, strangest of all, a kind of euphoria, a lightness that made everything feel distant and unreal. Devon collapsed. He dropped to his knees, vomiting, his face pale and slick with sweat. Amy and I grabbed him, tried to help him up, but he could barely stand. We were all feeling it now, that wrongness in the air, and I realized with a sick clarity that we were being poisoned. We dragged Devon back through the tunnel, back into the chamber, and Ricky helped pull us up into the church. The fresh air hit like a slap, cold and clean, and we stumbled outside, gasping. Devon had a seizure. His body convulsed, his eyes rolling back, and Amy was screaming into her phone trying to get a signal. It took 15 minutes before she found one. And by then, all four of us were experiencing symptoms. Hallucinations, cognitive impairment, the feeling that something was watching us from inside the church. The park rangers arrived first, then a helicopter. They airlifted Devon out and transported the rest of us to the nearest hospital. We spent 5 days there, being treated for gas exposure. Carbon monoxide, hydrogen sulfide, methane, the doctors said, a toxic cocktail that explained everything. The hallucinations, the euphoria, the violent physical reactions. But it did not explain the church. While we were recovering, Amy started researching. She dug into county records, old newspapers, historical archives, and she found it. The church was built in 1843 by a religious sect called the Purification Brotherhood. They were part of a wave of extreme religious movements during the Second Great Awakening, groups that believed in direct divine intervention, in signs and wonders, in purification through suffering. The Brotherhood believed they had found something sacred, a natural gas vent, a crack in the earth that exhaled warm, sulfurous air. They thought it was the breath of divine judgment, a test sent by God to separate the pure from the sinful. So, they built a church over it, and they used it. Members who sinned, or who were accused of sin, were taken down into the chamber for cleansing. They were exposed to the gas, which caused hallucinations, paranoia, violent behavior. The sect believed that if you survived, you were pure. If you died, you were condemned. In 1851, 14 members of the congregation died in a single night. They had gathered in the chamber for what the journal called a purification ceremony, and they never came back up. The survivors abandoned the site. The local authorities covered it up, listed the deaths as a fever outbreak, buried the bodies in unmarked graves, and let the forest reclaim the church. The rangers who responded to our call knew about it. The site had been documented in a geological survey in the 1970s, flagged as dangerous due to unstable gas vents and potential for explosion. Over the decades, a handful of other explorers had found the church, and several had been hospitalized with the same symptoms we experienced. The State Forestry Service sealed the tunnel 6 months after our trip. They poured concrete into the shaft, condemned the church, posted warnings. They said it was for safety, but I think it was because they were afraid of what else someone might find down there. I still have the photos Amy took. They sit on an external hard drive I have not opened in 3 years. Sometimes I think about the paintings, about how detailed they were, how specific. Gas exposure causes hallucinations, yes, but 4 people should not hallucinate the same images in the same places. Devon does not hike anymore. Ricky changed careers, works in an office now, something safe and fluorescent. Amy wrote her paper, won an award for it, never mentioned what we found in that tunnel. And me? I think about that crack in the cave wall. About the warm air that smelled like sulfur and something else. Something organic and old. About the journal entry that said the opening remains, it will always remain. Natural gas vents can burn for decades. The Darvaza crater in Turkmenistan has been on fire since 1971, 50 years of constant flame. Scientists found bacteria living in it, organisms that thrive in conditions that should be impossible for life. What if that crack led to something similar? What if those early settlers found it, built their church over it, thought they had discovered hell itself? What if they were right? They say curiosity killed the cat. Nobody mentions what it does to people who go looking for answers in places where answers were buried for a reason. I have not hiked the Adirondacks since. I do not think I ever will again. Some doors are sealed for a reason. Some things are meant to stay underground. And some churches, no matter how abandoned they seem, are still keeping secrets in the dark. What happens when the mind begins to fail, and the past refuses to stay buried? Now, let me tell you about what I found in my grandfather's closet, and the voices that still haunt me 30 years later. This happened when I was 7 years old, but I still remember every detail with the kind of clarity that trauma brands into your memory. My grandparents lived in an old 2-story house in rural Pennsylvania, the kind of house where the floorboards creaked with every step and the walls seemed to hold decades of whispered secrets. My younger brother Daniel and I used to visit them almost every other weekend, and we loved it there. Grandma would bake chocolate chip cookies that were still warm when we arrived, and Grandpa would let us help him in his woodworking shop in the garage, patiently showing us how to sand rough edges smooth, how to measure twice and cut once. Grandpa was a quiet man, gentle, with calloused hands that told stories of hard physical labor. He had worked in the coal mines for most of his life, back before the industry collapsed in our region. But he never talked much about those years. When anyone asked, he would just say he was lucky to have made it out, then change the subject. My mother once mentioned that Grandpa had what she called a hard life, that he had seen things that changed him. But she never elaborated, and as a child, I never thought to ask. That particular weekend in late October, I should have known something was different. Grandma had called my mother 3 times in the week leading up to our visit, which was unusual. I overheard fragments of their conversations, words like confused and forgetting things and not himself lately. My mother's face would tighten with worry, but when I asked what was wrong, she just smiled and said Grandpa was getting older. That is all, sweetheart. When we arrived that Friday evening, Grandma hugged us longer than usual, and I noticed dark circles under her eyes that had not been there before. Grandpa seemed mostly normal at dinner, although he kept pausing mid-sentence, staring at nothing, as if he had forgotten what he was saying. Once, he looked at me and said, "You were getting so big, Tommy." My name is Michael. Tommy was my uncle, my mother's younger brother, who had died in a car accident before I was born. We played hide and seek after dinner the way we always did when we visited. Daniel was it, and I ran upstairs looking for the perfect hiding spot. The upstairs hallway had 5 doors. 3 bedrooms, a bathroom, and a linen closet. I had hidden in that closet before, buried under spare blankets and old winter coats, and Daniel had never found me there. But this time, when I opened the closet door, someone was already inside. Grandpa was standing in the small space, hunched over because the closet was barely 5 feet high, facing the back wall. He was completely still, his hands pressed flat against the wall, his forehead touching it. He was wearing his usual cardigan and slippers, but something about his posture was all wrong, like he was trying to make himself as small as possible, trying to disappear into the darkness. I remember feeling proud that I had found him first. "Grandpa, I found you," I announced, grinning. He turned around slowly, and the person who looked back at me was not my grandfather. I know that sounds strange, because of course it was him. It was his face, his body, his clothes. But his eyes, His eyes were wrong. They were wide and wild, pupils dilated huge in the dim light, and when he looked at me, he looked through me, past me, like I was not even there, or like I was something else entirely, something threatening. "Get away from me," he shouted, his voice harsh and unfamiliar, nothing like the gentle tone he always used with us. He raised his hands defensively, backing further into the closet, and there was genuine fear in his expression, raw terror that made my stomach drop. "Get away. I do not know you. You are not real." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, and ran down the stairs. Daniel was still counting in the kitchen, and I could hear Grandma washing dishes. The ordinary sounds of a normal evening, but everything felt wrong now, tilted sideways. I found my mother in the living room and grabbed her arm, trying to explain what had happened, but the words came out jumbled. When she went upstairs to check, Grandpa had already come out of the closet and gone to bed. She told me later, acting confused about why I would say such a thing. "Grandpa is not feeling well lately," my mother explained, her voice carefully controlled. "Sometimes he gets confused. He did not mean to scare you." But I knew what I had seen. That was not confusion. That was fear. And the way he had looked at me, like I was a stranger, or worse, like I was something that should not exist, that look would stay with me for the rest of my life. That night, Daniel and I were sleeping in the guest room, twin beds on opposite sides of the room, when I woke to the sound of voices. It was around 3 in the morning. I knew because I could see the digital clock on the nightstand, glowing red in the darkness. At first I thought I was dreaming, but then I heard it again, a low murmur of conversation coming from somewhere upstairs. Multiple voices, talking over each other, laughing, crying, shouting. "Michael," Daniel whispered from his bed. "Do you hear that?" My heart was already racing. Yeah. We lay there listening for several minutes. The voices were coming from the hallway, from the direction of that closet. I could not make out specific words, but I could hear the tones, the emotions. Someone was laughing, high and manic. Someone else was sobbing. Another voice was shouting something urgent, desperate. "Is Grandpa having a party?" Daniel asked, because at 6 years old, that was the only explanation that made sense to him. But I was 7, old enough to know that no one has a party at 3 in the morning. Old enough to recognize that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong. Still, curiosity won over fear, and I slipped out of bed. Daniel followed me, because he was my little brother, and he followed me everywhere back then. We crept down the hallway toward the sounds. Grandma and Grandpa's bedroom door was closed, and no light showed underneath. The bathroom was dark, but the closet door, the same closet where I had found Grandpa earlier, was slightly ajar, and light spilled out from the crack. The voices were coming from inside. I pressed my eye to the opening and looked in. Grandpa was sitting on the floor of the closet, illuminated by the weak overhead bulb, and he was alone. Completely alone. But he was talking, his voice changing pitch and tone with every sentence, mimicking different people with disturbing accuracy. "I cannot breathe," he said in a high, panicked voice, clutching his throat. "The smoke. Where is the smoke coming from?" Then his voice dropped, became someone else. "Tommy, help me. I cannot see anything. The lights are gone. Tommy, where are you?" Another shift, older, authoritative. "Everyone stay calm. The rescue team is coming. They will be here soon, just hold on." A young voice, almost childlike. "I do not want to die here, please. I do not want to die in the dark." Back to the panicked voice. "The air is running out. I can feel it. We do not have much time." Laughter then, sharp and hysterical. "We are going to be famous. They will put us in the newspapers. The 43 miners who got themselves killed." Sobbing. Deep, wrenching sobs that made my chest hurt. "Sarah, if you are listening, I love you. Tell the kids I love them. Tell them their daddy tried to come home." He was performing all of these voices, all of these people, but he was completely alone in that closet, and the look on his face was not performance. It was anguish. It was memory. It was something breaking open after being locked away for decades. I must have made a sound, because suddenly his head snapped toward the door, and his eyes met mine through the crack. For a moment he seemed to recognize me, seemed to see me, and his expression crumpled into something like shame. Then he started screaming. "Get out! Get out! You are not real! None of you are real! They sent you to take me back, but I am not going back down there. I am not going back into the dark." Daniel and I ran back to our room and dove under the covers. Seconds later, we heard Grandma in the hallway, her voice gentle and tired, saying, "William, William, come back to bed. You are home. You are safe. Come back to bed." The voices stopped. The next morning, Grandma sat us down at the kitchen table while Grandpa slept in, which was unusual for him. She had been crying, I could tell, even though she tried to hide it. Her hands shook slightly as she poured orange juice for us. "Boys," she said quietly, "I need to explain something about your grandfather. His mind is getting sick. Do you know what dementia is?" We shook our heads. "It is an illness that makes people forget things, makes them confused about where they are and what is real. Sometimes Grandpa thinks he is somewhere else, sometime else. He does not mean to scare you. He is still your grandpa, but his brain is not working the way it used to." Daniel asked if Grandpa would get better, and Grandma's face crumpled slightly before she smoothed it out again. "No, sweetheart. This kind of sick does not get better, but we are going to love him and take care of him anyway." Then she added something else, something that stuck with me. "Your grandpa worked in the coal mines for 30 years. It was hard, dangerous work. There was an accident a long time ago before your mother was even born. He does not talk about it. He never talked about it. But lately, he thinks he is back there sometimes. He thinks he is still underground. My mother picked us up early that day. On the drive home, I asked her about the accident, and she sighed, her hands tight on the steering wheel. It was in 1972, she said, and I could hear the weight in her voice. There was a fire in the mine where your grandpa worked, 1,800 feet underground. The fire was on the main level, and most of the men were deeper down, working the coal face. The fire blocked the only way out." "What happened?" I whispered. 43 men died, carbon monoxide poisoning mostly. They were trapped down there for almost 18 hours before rescue teams could get to them. Your grandpa was one of the survivors. He was 34 years old. He never talked about it afterward, not to anyone, not even to me. We only know what happened because it was in all the newspapers. But I think he has been carrying those men with him ever since. And now that his mind is failing, now that he cannot keep the memories locked away anymore, they are all coming back." 3 weeks later, my parents insisted we visit again. Grandma needed support, they said, and it was important for us to see Grandpa, to show him we loved him even though he was sick. I did not want to go. I was terrified. But I was 7, and I did what I was told. Grandpa seemed better that day, almost normal. He smiled when we arrived, hugged us, asked about school. We ate lunch together, and he told a funny story about finding a raccoon in his garage. For a moment, I thought maybe Grandma had been wrong. Maybe he was getting better after all. Then halfway through dessert, he stopped talking mid-sentence and stared at me. Really stared, his eyes narrowing, his expression shifting from confusion to something like horror. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice flat and cold. "It is Michael, Dad," my mother said gently. "Your grandson." "No." He shook his head slowly, never breaking eye contact with me. "No, I do not know who that is. That is not. He looks like Michael, but he is not Michael. Where is my grandson? What did you do with him?" My mother tried to explain, tried to reassure him, but he was not listening. His attention turned to her, and his face twisted with suspicion and fear. "You all look like them," he said, his voice rising. "You look exactly like them, but you are not them. You cannot fool me. I know what you are. You are the ones who came after, who asked the questions, who wanted to know why we survived and they did not. You think I do not remember? You think I do not know?" He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair backward. They sent you to take me back down there, but I am not going. I am not going back into that hole. I am not going back to them." Grandma had to lead him away, murmuring soft reassurances that we could barely hear. My mother looked shaken, her face pale. We left soon after, and in the car, Daniel asked what was wrong with Grandpa. Why did he not know us anymore? My mother did not answer right away. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick. Sometimes when people's minds break, they cannot tell the difference between people they love and people they fear. Right now, Grandpa's mind is so damaged that he cannot recognize us anymore. He sees our faces, but he does not feel the love. So we just look like strangers to him, or worse. That night, I woke again to sounds coming from upstairs at my grandparents' house, or at least that is what I dreamed. But it was not a dream. Grandma called the next morning to apologize for what had happened, and my mother, thinking Daniel and I could not hear, asked if the episodes were still happening at night. "Every night," Grandma said, her voice breaking through the phone. "Every single night he goes to that closet, and he talks to them. He gives them voices. It is like he's trying to keep them alive, trying to give them the words they never got to say, and then he screams, 'Michael!' He screams like he's the one dying down there. I do not know how much more of this I can take." Months passed. We did not visit again. Grandpa's condition worsened rapidly, and eventually, he was moved to a nursing home that specialized in dementia care. My mother visited him regularly, but she did not take us with her anymore. She said it would be too hard for us to see him like that, too hard for him to see us and not know who we were. When I was 8, almost a full year after the closet incident, my mother took me to visit Grandpa one last time. Daniel stayed home with our father. I think my mother knew somehow that this was goodbye, and she wanted me to have a chance to say it, even if Grandpa did not understand. He was sitting in a chair by the window when we arrived, staring out at nothing. He was thinner now, his eyes distant and unfocused. He did not respond when we entered the room, did not seem to notice us at all. But then, after several minutes of my mother talking to him gently, telling him about our lives, his gaze shifted to me, and for just a moment, a brief flicker, I saw recognition in his eyes. "Did you hear them?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "The men in the dark? Did you hear them calling?" I did not know what to say. My mother squeezed my hand, but I pulled free and knelt beside his chair. "Yes, Grandpa," I said. "I heard them." He nodded slowly, tears forming in the corners of his eyes. "They want me to remember. They do not want to be forgotten. 43 men, and nobody remembers their names anymore. Nobody remembers they were fathers, husbands, sons. Nobody remembers they died in the dark, calling for help that never came." His hand reached out and gripped mine, and his grip was surprisingly strong, desperately strong. "I tried to save them," he whispered. I went back in. I pulled 5 men out before the shaft collapsed, but there were 43 more I could not reach, and I can still hear them calling my name. Every night I hear them calling. Then the clarity faded from his eyes, and he was gone again, back to wherever his broken mind went when it left the present behind. That was the last time I saw my grandfather fully present. He died 6 months later, and at his funeral, I learned things about him that I had never known. Old men approached my grandmother, men with weathered faces and miners' calluses on their hands, and they told stories. "Your husband saved my life," one old man said, gripping Grandma's hands. "The day of the fire, when the smoke started coming down, everyone was panicking, running in every direction. Bill grabbed me and 4 other guys and led us to a ventilation shaft he remembered from the old maps. We crawled through 200 feet of darkness, following his voice, and we made it out. We only made it out because of him. Another man, his voice rough with emotion, said he went back in 3 times, 3 times after he was already safe. He kept saying, "There are more. We have to get them out. There are more." The shaft collapsed on his 3rd trip back. He barely made it out alive. They had to drag him away from the entrance because he wanted to keep going back in, even though the whole thing was coming down. My grandmother cried then, silently, and I understood that she was learning these things for the first time too. That Grandpa had never told her, that he had carried this alone for 40 years, carried the weight of 43 deaths and the guilt of 5 lives saved, carried the voices of men calling his name in the dark, until his mind broke under the burden and the voices finally escaped. Later, after the funeral, my grandmother gave me a folder of papers she had collected. Medical records, newspaper articles, research she had done trying to understand what was happening to her husband. "I want you to have this," she said, "so you will understand. What you saw in that closet, what you heard, it was not just dementia, Michael. The doctors told me your grandfather was suffering from something called Capgras delusion. It is a condition where the brain gets damaged, usually by dementia or trauma, and it stops being able to connect faces with emotions. He could see us. He knew what we looked like, but he could not feel the love. So to him, we were strangers wearing familiar faces. We were imposters. And when you cannot trust your own family, everyone becomes a threat." She pulled out another paper, an article about PTSD and dementia. They also said that when dementia progresses, it strips away the barriers we build to protect ourselves from trauma. Your grandpa spent 40 years keeping those memories locked away, keeping those voices silent. He never talked about the mine, never talked about the men who died, but the dementia took away his ability to suppress it. So every night, his mind would take him back there, back to the darkness, back to the dying men, and he would give them voices because they did not get to say goodbye. They did not get to tell their families they loved them. He was trying to speak for them. I read the newspaper clippings later that night. 1972, Martin No. 7, Mine, Pennsylvania. Fire broke out on the main level at 7:15 in the morning. Smoke and carbon monoxide spread through the shafts within minutes. 96 men underground when the fire started. By the time rescue teams could enter, 20 hours later, 43 were dead. The article listed their names. Tommy Harrison, age 23. Richard Kowalski, age 37. Robert Chen, age 19. Name after name, each one a person, a life cut short. I recognized some of the names from that night in the closet, from the voices Grandpa had been mimicking. Tommy, Richard, names he had been calling to in the darkness, names that had haunted him for decades. The article also mentioned the survivors, and there was a photograph, grainy and old, of a group of men wrapped in blankets, covered in soot, their faces hollow with shock. I found my grandfather in the back row. And even at 34, he looked like an old man, like something inside him had already died. I am 37 now, the same age my grandfather was when that photograph was taken. I have my own family, my own children. And sometimes, late at night, I think about what I witnessed in that closet. I think about how we never really know what people carry inside them, what traumas hide beneath the surface of normal life. My grandfather was a kind man, a gentle man, who taught me how to sand wood and listened patiently to my childish stories. But inside him, buried deep, were 43 voices that never got to say goodbye. 43 men calling his name in the darkness, and a guilt so profound that it took the destruction of his own mind to finally set it free. The medical explanation makes sense. Capgras delusion, PTSD triggered by dementia. brain damage stripping away the barriers between past and present. Science can explain what I saw, what I heard, but sometimes I wonder, because the voices he mimicked that night were so specific, so detailed. He called out names I did not know, names I only learned later from newspaper articles. He spoke in different accents, different ages, different personalities. He sobbed like a young father who would never see his children grow up. He laughed like a man losing his grip on sanity in the face of death. He prayed in words I later found in one of the recovered letters. A note clutched in a dead miner's hand, a note saying, "Tell my wife I love her. Tell my kids I tried to come home." How did he know those words? How did he know those voices? Was it just his trauma, his broken mind trying to process decades of survivors' guilt? Or was it something else? Something I do not have the words to explain? I still think about my grandfather standing in that closet, giving voice to men who died calling for help that came too late. I think about how he spent his final years believing his own family were strangers, unable to feel the love we had for him, trapped in his memories of darkness and death. I think about how dementia does not just steal who you are. Sometimes it reveals who you have always been, underneath. Sometimes it releases what you spent a lifetime trying to bury. If you have elderly relatives who start acting strangely, who seem to be reliving traumas from decades ago, please be patient with them. Be kind, because you might not know what they survived. You might not know what they carry inside. You might not know what they have been trying so hard to forget. And if you do know, if they did tell you their stories, listen. Remember, because some voices, once silenced, will find a way to be heard, even if it takes a lifetime, even if it costs everything. Some voices refuse to be forgotten. My grandfather made sure of that.